Hello, Honors Biology. This is Mrs. Kozian. This is Unit 4, Photosynthesis, and this is going to be video number 3, Introduction to Photosynthesis. For this portion here, we're just going to kind of talk about what goes into photosynthesis, reactants, products, what's the equation look like. Okay. First thing we need for photosynthesis is light. Okay. White light. If you guys remember from physics, it's actually a mixture of many different wavelengths of light. If you remember your Roy G. Biv. There are scientists Ingenhouse and Priestley, and you guys read a little bit about them in video 2 that studied one of them studied that light is needed for photosynthesis, and the other one figured out that we need light to create oxygen in photosynthesis. Okay, so different wavelengths equal different colors. We also need to have carbon dioxide coming from the environment. We need to have water, and we need to have an organelle called a chloroplast. Now, we talked about those in cells a little bit, but we're going to talk more about what's the real structure of a chloroplast in this one. Okay, so you guys start with, you guys have two major pigments in there. You have chlorophyll and keratin. Sometimes you'll hear it called keratin. Chlorophyll is the greens, and then keratin is the reddish, the reds, the browns, the yellows. Chlorophyll does not absorb green, it reflects it. That's why plants look green to us, because the light is reflected back to us. Then chlorophyll is going to absorb the other colors that we don't see. So things like violets, blues, darker reds, those are absorbed. Now remember guys, light is energy. So when light is absorbed, so is its energy. So we take that light energy from the sun, and through the process of photosynthesis, we're going to capture that into high energy sugar molecules like glucose. Okay. Light and pigments. As the chlorophyll in leaves decays in the autumn, the green color is going to fade and it's going to be replaced by those orange and reds. Now, unfortunately, that's when the leaves die. That's when we can't really, when we start to lose that pigment, we start to lose the ability to absorb those really high energy wavelengths like blue and violet. So that's why they start to turn yellow, red, and then orange. All right, you guys can see here's a little graph. You had a graph in class, or you will have one, where you guys kind of looked at different wavelengths. This right here, you guys, this is where your greens and yellows are. Those are reflected, which is the opposite of being absorbed. And then here, the high energy blues and violets are absorbed, and then we have some oranges and reds that are absorbed. Okay, right here, 500 to 600 nanometers, very little light's absorbed. I just showed you guys, talked about that one's green. And then chlorophyll absorbs so strongly that it can mask other less intense colors. So that's why you don't see these colors when you look at a plant. All right, this is the an explanation of the equation for photosynthesis written out in a sentence. Plants use the energy of sunlight to convert water and carbon dioxide into high energy carbohydrates and produce oxygen as a waste product. Right? Sunlight happens right here in the middle in the chemical reaction. All right, there you can see what's missing, light energy and chloroplasts. If I were going to write that out in my equation, I'd put that right over the reaction arrow in the middle. Here's just a quick little picture, shows you guys, you got light, CO2 and water coming in, carbohydrates and oxygen coming out. Now if you think about it, what do you guys take in and release? Okay. We take in oxygen and carbs, and we release CO2, water, and heat when we breathe out, okay? If you put your hand in front of your face and breathe on your hand right now, you can actually feel that the carbon dioxide being released, the water, your hand will feel wet, and you also feel heat, which is released. ATP releases heat when you breathe out. Okay, so when we get to cellular respiration, you guys, it'll just be flip-flopped. Okay, now the thing that we use to complete photosynthesis is called a chloroplast. And there are two reactions. We're going to talk about those in another video in more detail. Light-dependent reactions and Calvin cycle, or light-independent. Okay, those mean the same thing. All right, this is just a little example of our chloroplast here. You're going to see this in your book, and we will talk in more detail about what these different structures are. Okay, you guys, we want to go ahead and draw this picture. Here in your chloroplast, you have different portions. You have an outer and inner membrane. You have thylakoids, which are these individual little stacks here, okay? And they have tons of chlorophyll in them. Inside, that's called the lumen. The empty space on the outside is the stroma. It's kind of like cytoplasm. And then you guys have granum. A granum is a stack of thylakoids, okay? I always think of the thylakoids like little pancakes, and then a granum is a stack of those pancakes. You might see it called grana too. That's the plural for granum. Okay, here is quick little compare and contrast of what's going to happen in our two different reactions inside our chloroplast. Okay, I'm going to put them all up so you guys can copy them, and then I'll talk about them. Oop, wrong way. Sorry. So you guys go ahead. You might want to pause me and write all this down, and then start up again, and I'll explain them. Okay. All right. So now you've paused it. You've written everything down. Just listen to me explain these two processes. Okay. Light dependent is just what it means. It depends on light. Light independent doesn't have to happen with light, okay? This happens in the thylakoid membranes, okay? So this happens in my little pancakes. This requires light. Water goes in, oxygen comes out. I take ADP and I use that light energy to add a phosphate to make ATP. And then there's another compound called NADPH plus that we'll talk about later. And then that is converted into NADPH. Okay, so we add a hydrogen ion to that. Okay. Now, light independent happens in the stroma, so it happens outside the thylakoid membranes or outside the granum. Does not need water. Does not need light. Takes in CO2. Remember my two reactants, guys? Now I've used up my two reactants, and I've created my two products. Makes sugar, glucose. I use that energy in ATP to make that glucose. And so that extra phosphate gets popped off, you guys, and goes back to ADP. We take this extra hydrogen ion off, and it goes back to NADPH. So this stuff here is going to be recycled back to the light-dependent reactions. We're going to add the energy-rich ions. It's going to go back over here and get used. So this is constantly cycling back and forth. All right, just your chloroplast again, so you guys can see. Light dependent happens here, light independent happens out here. All right, quick questions to ask yourself. Why do plants appear green? Because they reflect green pigment, green wavelength. 4 requirements for photosynthesis. Okay, go back to your first slide, make sure you know that. Light dependent reaction happens in the thylakoid membranes or the granum. And then make sure you can write the equation for photosynthesis. Both writing out the chemical formulas and in words. Okay, make sure you guys can do all of that for this portion of the video notes. And that's it, you guys are done.